Hi, this is Kathy from Gadgets Top 321, and in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at Vinta Serena Mermaid Green. I'll do some writing samples with Vinta Serena on 52 GSM Tomore River paper using a variety of pens and nib sizes. I'll look at some writing samples that I did earlier with Vinta Serena on other types of paper. I'll compare Vinta Serena to similar inks from my collection. And finally, I'll take a look at the results of my water resistance test. Writing with Vinta Serena using a glass dip nib felt a little dry, but after I did the little scribble, the writing sample that I did was nice and uniform and looks really good. I did re-dip it to do this writing sample, and since I didn't do the little scribble, the ink came off the nib in kind of a quick blob and then got dry kind of quickly. The swatch that I do with tweezers was nice and crisp and uniform on this paper, but it didn't behave like that on all papers. The drip at the end of the swatch had a nice dual shading quality and a little thin halo of bluish green maybe, and almost starting to look like tan in the center. The drip as well as the letters had some of those dual shading qualities and halo effect. I'm going to begin with my Pilot Cacuno. It has an extra fine stainless steel nib. Writing with this nib felt pretty dry, and since it's such a fine nib, it made it feel scratchy, and this light colored ink is not very legible, so writing with this nib and ink combination was pretty unpleasant. Next, I've got a Pilot Custom 74. It has a 14 karat fine nib. I've mentioned before that the upstrokes with this Custom 74 nib are drier than the other strokes. You can see that here. The upstrokes are almost non-existent, and so when you're writing with this pen, it's alternating back and forth between okay and unpleasant. And so the entire writing experience is just okay, unpleasant, which adds up to being an unpleasant writing experience. Next, I've got my Leonardo Momento Zero in the Jade finish. It has an extra fine stainless steel nib. This also feels dry, and it's not as unpleasant as the first two, but that still doesn't make it enjoyable. It's just feels too dry. It feels like you're writing with a pen that's just on the verge of running out of ink. Next, I've got a Sailor 1911 Standard. It has a 14 karat medium nib. In fact, you can see over here on the side, it's the hard medium. It's hard to tell from my little ink smear because whenever you wipe it, it looks like it almost wipes the ink completely away, but this Sailor is noticeably wetter than the previous 3 pens, and it's got a dry chalky feel, but to me it's very enjoyable and I really like the way it looks. Next, I've got a Platinum 3776. It also has a 14 karat medium nib. Normally this platinum medium is my go-to nib for these type of pale, kind of shady inks. I don't know if this one's necessarily a shady type of ink, but pale inks like this, I usually enjoy using them in this platinum medium nib. But I've got to say, the Sailor was my favorite this time, and that's unusual because usually I will try both of these nibs head to head, and I've discovered that most of the time it's the platinum is my favorite, but this time it's the Sailor hands down. At least on this paper and a few of my other writing samples, the Sailor was my favorite, and I think you can see it's noticeably wetter. The legibility's better, it just looks better, and it felt better as I was writing with it. I would say this one was just okay. Next, I've got my Pilot Metropolitan. It has a stainless steel calligraphy medium nib. Okay, this nib didn't feel scratchy, but it was very dry. You can just see it. It looks like you just don't have enough ink coming out of the nib. Even before I smeared it, the X was very pale. So writing with this pen has just been very unpleasant, and it is just not necessarily that it feels dry, it just is too dry. There's not enough ink coming out of the nib. Next, I've got a Caveco AL Sport in the golden espresso finish. It has a stainless steel broad nib. Very smooth, a nice amount of ink coming out, and like I mentioned up here with the dip nib and the tweezer swatch, you're able to see some of that dual shading character, and this was just very nice, very smooth. On this paper it was glassy smooth. I better make a note of that. And finally, I've got a Hou X750. It has a stainless steel 1.5 stub nib. Very smooth, but I've got to say, in this nib, it looks okay. It grabbed onto the paper pretty well here at the beginning, but I could tell I was having to press harder. I didn't get that effortless, luxurious writing experience like I do with a lot of inks in this nib. You had to work to get this amount of ink on the page, and I've discovered on some of the other writing samples that I had to write at a more vertical angle than was normally comfortable for me just to get the ink to grab the paper. While that dries, I'll take a look at some of the other writing samples. On my Rhodia paper, the ink swatch is nice and crisp in this one, but my writing was a little bit scratchier. It wasn't as smooth as it was on some of the other smoother papers, like the ink collection card, but it is nice and uniform. Since the writing is a little bit thinner, I'm not seeing as much of the dual shading, at least in the glass dip nib. Now this was unusual. With the 1.5 stub nib, it felt kind of dry, and this is one of the papers where I had to write with a more vertical angle to get it to grab the paper. The Caveco broad nib felt a little dry, but it wasn't so bad to make it unpleasant. It was just drier than normal, but I liked it. It was nice, and I like the way the ink looks. The same thing with the Sailor 1911. Compared to all these others that felt just a little too dry, the Caveco broad and the Sailor medium nib, they felt nice. I felt like they would be enjoyable to write with. All of the others just were past that threshold of they were just too dry. And the Pilot Cacuno, that extra fine, again, was just too thin to be legible. On my copy paper, this ink looked a little grainy. You don't get that dual shading type of look that you get on the more fountain pen friendly papers. You can see the broader nibs felt okay on this paper, and surprisingly, the platinum was more enjoyable than the Sailor, which is odd. I believe on every other writing sample, the Sailor was more pleasant. Now, the Pilot Metropolitan was just so dry it was unpleasant, and the Sailor was unpleasant. You can see how it looks. It looks a little more blobby, like the ink flow. I guess since it was a wetter nib, maybe this is one of those instances where it made the paper soggy and the nib was just hanging up on it, and the drier platinum, maybe that's why it performed better. The Pilot Custom 74 was just too blobby. Like I mentioned it before, alternating between wet and dry was just unpleasant. I was surprised by this light colored ink. It actually bled through my copy paper more than I was expecting. Everything except for the Pilot Metropolitan, but that doesn't change my opinion about this ink in the Pilot Metropolitan. It was still just very unpleasant. Writing with this ink in my Leuchtturm bullet journal was pretty pleasant, especially with this wider nib, but look at my ink smear. I always do an ink smear to test the wetness. You can't even tell that I did an ink smear. The show through from the other inks on the back of this page are darker than my ink smear. I don't even know if you can see it. Look at that. So my X that I made was as dark as these letters, but as soon as I wiped it, it just wiped the ink completely away. Which reminds me, as I was writing with this ink, if I would get some on my finger, look how there's very little residue and it cleans up very easily. I don't have many inks that are similar to Vinta Serena or Mermaid Green, and that's one of the reasons I picked it out. That name, Mermaid Green, just goes so well with the effect you get on the page from this ink, and it was something unique. Kyono Oto Urahiro is it's not the same. In fact, as I'm looking at them together, as this ink separates, I guess the green is separating into the yellow component and the blue component, so it's making this ink look more blue, especially on my viewfinder. But this Kyono Oto Urahiro is more legible in the nib, but I think this is the ink that when I tested them, it was kind of dry and unpleasant in the nib. And you can see on this smooth paper how much difficulty I had getting the ink to grab it. I could barely do my ink swatch with my tweezers. Verdigris is, as I'm looking at these two together, is not very similar. It's a light colored, but it is far more blue and more gray. This ink appeared to be more gray to me before I put it up next to Verdigris. And one other ink I wanted to compare with it was the Ferris Wheel Press Blue Cotton Candy. This was the most pale, most illegible ink that I've ever tried. Vinta Serena is better in that respect. The Pilot Extra Fine nib was too thin, but most of the other nibs were, for the most part, pretty legible. I did a writing sample on a little piece of Rhodia paper with all the nibs that I've shown just now and submerged it in water for 10 minutes. And you can see here that Vinta Serena Mermaid Green is not water resistant at all. Okay, this type of ink I'm normally not a fan of, but I enjoyed it so much in my Sailor and the Caveco that I'm considering picking up a bottle of it. It's just such a nice, pleasant, calming color, and the name really suits it, Mermaid Green. It does. It looks like the scales of a mermaid tail. And it's a light colored ink. I didn't have any, well, I was going to say I didn't have any bleed through, and I didn't, but here on the M that I mentioned where the ink came down pretty heavy, it did get pretty deep into the paper, but it's a light colored ink. I didn't have any that got completely through, and there's very little show through. When you hold it back like this, I did like playing with it in the dip nib. I can see myself, if I do get a bottle, I can see myself playing with it with a dip nib. But for the longer writing, like writing a letter or something like that, the Sailor Medium and the Caveco Broad look the best and were pleasant to use. In fact, I can see myself writing letters with the Caveco Broad nib, and I think this Sailor Medium nib would be enjoyable to journal with. The rest, oh, I have no desire to ink up any of these other pens with this ink. Alright, if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.